In this video, I'm going to be installing the Bosch RA1811 router table into the extension wing of my Ridgid R4512 table saw. I've been contemplating building a router table into this area for a long time, but decided on the RA1811 for two reasons. First, it was on sale on Amazon a few months back, and the deal was too good to pass up. And second, it fits nearly perfectly into the extension wing, minus about 1/8 of an inch. I start the process by unplugging and moving the saw away from my assembly table. Next, I unbolt and remove the brace from the end of the extension wing, and then remove the end caps on the fence rails. I then clamp two pieces of 1x material to provide something to rest the router table on while positioning and drilling the holes for the bolts that hold it in place. Here you can see the slot that the bolts will slide into on the front side of the fence rail. I then place the router table onto the 1x shelves I've clamped into place. Up next, I lift the router table to mark the bolt locations on the back rail. Then I remove the router table, clamps, and 1x shelf to use my square to mark the hole locations on the top and back of the rail. Next, I use a center punch to create an indention to make drilling the bolt holes easier. The first step in drilling the holes is to drill a small pilot hole so I can use a step bit for the larger holes that the bolts can fit through. I then use a step bit to drill the larger holes. As I'm sure most of you are yelling at your screen already, don't worry, I eventually remembered to wear safety glasses. After the larger holes are drilled, I use a smaller bit again to drill holes so we can transfer the hole center to the back side of the rail. I then take the step bit and create the larger holes on the front side of the rail. These holes need to be a bit smaller, so I only needed to drill 2 steps in. Next, I clamp the 1x shelf back in place and slide the 5/16 bolts onto the front rail of my table saw. And make sure to place the bolts in approximately the right spot by looking at the opposite rail holes. I then place the router table into place and position the bolts so that the table drops onto the bolts. Finally, I finger tighten the nuts under the bolts from the underside of the table. With this complete, I can remove the clamps and 1x from the front rail. I I can then move to securing the table to the back rail. I start by removing the clamp and one by and lifting the router table so that I can secure the bolt and washer through the hole in the back rail. I do this for all 4 holes. Here you can see why the washers are needed on the back rail. The router table is just shy of the perfect width, so we add washers to make sure we don't pull the rail out of square for the fence. Finally, I add the nuts to the bolts just as we did for the front rail. Again, only finger tight. Up next, it's time to level the router table with the table saw top. I start by loosening all of the bolts and leveling the back rail side closest to the table. This should be level with the edge of the table so it doesn't interfere with the fence. I then level the back bolt and tighten all the bolts securing it level. I then move to the front rail and repeat the same process. Once complete, I test that the fence still easily slides across the router table. As you can see here, it didn't on my first try, and required some back and forth to get it right. One thing I need to do to make the fence slide easily across the table is to apply some paste wax to both the table and the bottom of the fence. Next, I install the router table insert. I start by inserting the nuts with the lock nuts fully threaded onto them. As you see next, these help level the insert to the table. I then unscrew the nuts and check with a level to make sure the insert is level with the tabletop. I do this for all of the bolts, ensuring that they are all level and that the insert doesn't rock between each. It's now finally time to install the router itself. I'm using a Bosch router, so these installation steps might be different for you. However, this router top does support most routers. The first step is to remove the base plate from the router itself. After this, I position the insert onto the router and bolt it in place. I then lower the insert and router into place on the table. Using 4 bolts and 4 nuts underneath the table, I secure the insert plate to the router table. The final step in assembling the table is to secure the power switch to the router table. This is done with 2 nuts and bolts that attach to the switch enclosure and slide onto the table edge. I then put the fence rail caps back into place. With the bit in place in the router, I put one of the 3 inserts into place and raise the bit to the right height. I then power on the router and route a piece of scrap to test the table. Alright, so that's going to wrap this one up. This was actually a pretty simple install. A couple things to note about this. The one thing I want to build onto this is actually a sacrificial fence over the fence here, so that if I'm routing, along the edge of a board, I can kind of have a little gap here that allows me to fit the bit into that gap so that I can route over the edge of the board. One thing I did need to do was add some paste wax, as I said in the video earlier, to allow this fence to kind of slide easier over the router table itself. It does take quite a bit of effort to level the router table itself, but that is something you're going to want to spend quite a bit of time on to get right, to ensure that you get right. The other thing that I'm not exactly sure that I need are bolts along the back edge here to connect it directly with the table. I don't feel I really need those at this point, but that might be something that I come back later and add. It's just a simple process, again, of drilling the holes through and bolting it in place if that's needed. But I've tested it and I really don't think at this point it's needed. So yeah, I really just wanted to get this video out because I didn't see too many videos explaining the process out there. So if this helped you, I'd really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those down below. Otherwise, that'll be it. Thanks, I appreciate it.